The United States ran its biggest regime change operation in a generation to remove one man from power in Venezuela. 8 months later, his regime is still in charge. Here is how that happened. In the early hours of the 3rd of January, 2026, a photograph went out to the world. It showed a heavy-set man in a gray tracksuit, blindfolded, sitting on a military aircraft, flanked by American agents. The man was Nicolás Maduro, until that morning the president of Venezuela, and the aircraft was carrying him from a U.S. warship in the Caribbean toward a courtroom in New York. American special forces had flown into Caracas in the dark, pulled him out of his own compound, and were gone before the sun came up. The President of the United States called it one of the most stunning displays of American power in the nation's history, and by any military measure, it was. It had taken about 6 hours. Now move forward 8 months to the summer of 2026 and walk into the Miraflores Palace in Caracas, the seat of Venezuelan power. Sitting at the top of the government is a woman named Delcy Rodriguez. She was Maduro's vice president. She was his oil minister. She oversaw the intelligence services that kept his government in power. Maduro once called her his tigress for how fiercely she defended his rule. And as of April, the United States has lifted the sanctions it once placed on her. So here is the question this whole story turns on. And it is not a conspiracy theory. It is just arithmetic. If the United States removed a regime, why is that regime still running Venezuela? Let's be careful and precise about what happened, because the details matter and the emotions around this are enormous. Start with the operation itself, quickly, because that part has been told many times. After months of planning, and after what President Trump described as a final phone call giving Maduro a chance to step down, USA forces launched Operation Absolute Resolve. Maduro and his wife were captured and flown out of the country. Both had been indicted in New York on drug trafficking charges. The Cuban government later announced that 32 Cuban personnel were killed during the operation, saying they had been carrying out missions at the request of their Venezuelan counterparts. Trump said there were no American casualties. That is the part the world watched. What almost nobody has examined is what came next. Within 2 days, Venezuela's high court and its military did something that surprised many observers. They did not collapse. They did not hand power to the opposition. They followed the Constitution's line of succession and swore in the sitting vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, as acting president. And here is the contrast that defines this entire episode. When the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, it tore the existing government out by the roots, dissolved the army, banned the ruling party, and started from zero. In Venezuela, Washington did the opposite. It removed one man and left the structure standing. Trump said afterward that he was working, in his words, really well with Rodriguez, and that she was essentially willing to do what was needed. He also warned her, publicly, that she could face the same fate as Maduro if she did not deliver on American demands. So the United States had captured the head of the government but kept the body of it in place, now under pressure to reform from the inside. The obvious question is, did it reform? 8 months of record lets us actually check promise against result. There were, broadly, 4 promises. Let's take them one at a time. The first promise was that the United States would oversee a transition. Trump said America would effectively run the country until there could be a safe and proper handover of power. 8 months later, the person running the country is the same woman who ran its economy and its intelligence service under Maduro. James Story, a former U.S. ambassador to Venezuela, who served under both the first Trump administration and the Biden administration, described her strategy bluntly. According to Story, Rodriguez is moving as slowly as she possibly can on political reform, doing, in his words, just enough to make it look as if she is complying, while betting that Washington's attention will fade after the U.S. midterm elections. Talks about actual elections in Venezuela only began this month. The acting president is, 8 months on, still acting. The second promise was regime change itself. Trump held Venezuela up as a model for the kind of transformation he wanted to see in places like Iran and Cuba. But critics have pointed out the obvious. The government was left largely intact. One face at the top changed. The United Nations has said that human rights violations in Venezuela have continued despite the change in president. If regime change means removing a regime, then what happened in Venezuela is harder to name because the regime is still there. The third promise was about oil, the reason many believe the operation happened at all. Venezuela sits on some of the largest oil reserves on Earth. Here, something concrete did happen. Within weeks, Venezuela's legislature passed a sweeping oil reform law that analysts described as heavily shaped by Washington. Private companies can now operate on their own instead of only as junior partners to the state. Royalty payments were cut, and the state gave up its lock on exploration. On paper, a win. In practice, as of this summer, Venezuela's oil industry remains in disrepair, and foreign investors have largely stayed away. And the broader economy has not turned around. The macroeconomic gains have not translated into lower inflation, higher wages, or the return of basic public services. The law changed. The reality, so far, has not. The fourth promise was rarely said out loud, but it may be the one that actually landed. For years, Cuba had propped up the Venezuelan security state with intelligence officers and advisors, and in return, Venezuela sent Cuba oil it desperately needed. When Maduro fell, that arrangement broke. According to reporting compiled by analysts, the Venezuelan subsidies to Cuba have ended, and hundreds of Cuban soldiers, intelligence officers, and bodyguards have been leaving Caracas. This is the one area where the outcome clearly matched an American goal. The operation genuinely weakened Cuba's position, and it did so in a way that will be hard to reverse. Any honest accounting has to include it. So that is the ledger. One promise quietly stalled, one promise contradicted by the very structure left in place, one promise passed into law but not yet into reality, and one promise that actually worked. Now for the parts that simply do not add up. Not theories, just facts that were never fully explained. The first is those 32 Cubans. Set aside the politics and just sit with the fact. 32 Cuban military personnel died inside the compound of a foreign head of state. Cuba confirmed the deaths and said they were there on missions requested by Venezuela. That single admission confirmed out loud something that had long been denied: the depth of Cuban security presence woven into the Venezuelan government. The second is the phone call. Trump has said that a week before the raid, he personally called Maduro and told him to surrender, and that Maduro came close to agreeing before deciding to stay. The only source for that conversation is Trump's own retelling at a press conference. What was actually said, and how close Maduro actually came, we do not know. And the third is the strangest. Some Venezuelan witnesses describe members of Maduro's guard bleeding from the nose and vomiting blood during the raid, and speculated about some kind of unusual weapon. That claim has never been officially confirmed, and it should be treated as exactly what it is, an unverified account. But it sits on the list of things that were never cleared up. And then there is the detail that captures the whole paradox in a single act. In April, 3 months after the operation, the United States lifted its sanctions on Delcy Rodriguez, the same official it had previously sanctioned over allegations of human rights abuses and corruption. The woman at the center of the old government became the partner of choice for the new arrangement. So step back and look at where Venezuela actually is. 8 months after the most dramatic regime change operation the United States has run in a generation. The man who was captured is in an American courtroom. The government he built is still standing, run by his most loyal lieutenant. The promised transition has not happened. Elections are only now being discussed. The oil law was rewritten, but the oil is not flowing and the investors are not coming. The one clear success was strategic and quiet: the severing of Cuba. And the acting president is betting, according to the American diplomats who watch her, that if she waits long enough, Washington will simply look away. Here is the finding, and it is uncomfortable precisely because the military operation was not the failure. The raid did exactly what it was designed to do. The failure, if that is even the right word, is in the idea underneath it, the assumption that you can change a country by removing one person from the top of it. A regime is not a man. It is an army, an intelligence service, a court, a bureaucracy, a network of people who all have reasons to keep things roughly as they are. You can lift the man out in 6 hours. The machine he sat on top of does not leave on an aircraft. 8 months later, Venezuela is the clearest possible demonstration of the difference between removing a ruler and removing a regime. Cause of death: they changed the man and mistook it for changing the machine. If you want more autopsies of history's decisions, the ones that worked, the ones that didn't, and the ones we're still living inside, subscribe to Battle Autopsy. Thanks for watching.